In the quiet hallways of St. Mary's Hospital, a young nurse walked briskly from one room to another, her sneakers squeaking faintly against the shiny tiled floor. She was in her late 20s, with tired eyes but a warm smile that never seemed to fade, even after hours of back-to-back work. This was a woman who had seen more than her fair share of struggles, both in life and at the hospital, but she carried herself with a quiet strength that inspired those around her. Her name wasn't important here. What mattered was her story. Every day she juggled caring for patients while dealing with the weight of her own problems. Bills were piling up faster than she could pay them off. Her mother's medical expenses had left her drowning in debt. And on top of that, she still had student loans hanging over her head like a dark cloud. But despite all this, she showed up every morning, ready to give her best to people who needed her most. Among her many responsibilities, there was one patient who stood out, a man in his late 70s who lay motionless in a private room on the 4th floor. He had been admitted months ago after suffering a massive stroke, and since then, he hadn't opened his eyes or responded to anything. His chart listed him as James Whitaker, but beyond that, no one really knew much about him. The staff referred to him simply as the comatose patient. His family visited rarely, maybe once every few weeks, and when they did, their visits were short and awkward, filled with uncomfortable silences. To most people, he might have seemed like just another name on the roster, a body occupying a bed in an otherwise busy hospital. But to this nurse, he was different. There was something about him that made her pause. Maybe it was the way his hands rested so peacefully on the blanket, or how his face looked calm despite everything his body had endured. Whatever it was, she found herself drawn to him in a way she couldn't quite explain. Every night after her rounds were done and the hospital grew quieter, she would slip into his room and sit by his bedside. She didn't say much at first, just held his hand gently and told him about her day. Sometimes she'd talk about funny things that happened during her shift, the time a doctor accidentally spilled coffee on himself, or the little boy in pediatrics who kept trying to sneak cookies into his IV bag. Other times she'd share bits of her own life, like how worried she was about losing her apartment or how hard it was to balance work and taking care of her younger sibling. But one evening, feeling particularly overwhelmed, she decided to try something new. Instead of talking, she began singing softly. At first it felt strange, like she was intruding on his silence, but soon the words flowed naturally. She chose simple songs, ones her grandmother used to sing to her when she was sick as a child. Ballads about hope, hymns about faith, and lullabies meant to soothe restless hearts. As her voice filled the dimly lit room, she noticed something remarkable. His breathing seemed steadier, almost rhythmic, as if her melodies were reaching some hidden part of him. From that night on, singing became her ritual. No matter how exhausted she made sure to visit him before ending her shift. Each song was chosen carefully, each note delivered with care. Some nights she sang cheerful tunes to lift his spirits. Other times she picked slower, sadder songs because she thought maybe he needed to hear someone else's pain too. It was her way of letting him know he wasn't alone even though he couldn't respond. What she didn't realize, however, was that James Whitaker wasn't just any ordinary man. To the outside world, he was known as a billionaire tycoon, one of the richest people in the country. He had built his empire quietly, avoiding the spotlight and living a life of solitude. Few people knew his real name, let alone his face. And now, lying in that hospital bed, unable to move or speak, his wealth meant nothing. Yet, here was this young nurse, treating him not as a powerful figure but as a human being deserving of kindness. As the days turned into weeks, something incredible started happening. While James remained unconscious, his vital signs began improving ever so slightly. Doctors couldn't pinpoint exactly why. It wasn't due to any change in medication or treatment, but they couldn't ignore the data either. His heart rate stabilized, his blood pressure improved, and his brain activity showed subtle signs of progress. None of this made sense medically, but deep down, the nurse believed it was because of the connection she was building with him, one song at a time. Little did she know her nightly visits weren't going unnoticed. Someone was watching closely, observing the bond forming between the two. And soon, this secret observer would step forward, setting off a chain of events neither the nurse nor James could have imagined. For now, though, the routine continued unchanged. Night after night, the soft strains of her voice drifted through the hospital corridors, weaving a thread of hope in a place often overshadowed by illness and uncertainty. As the weeks went by, the nightly singing sessions became more than just a routine for the nurse. They became a lifeline. Each evening, after finishing her duties and making sure all her patients were settled, she would find herself drawn to the same room on the 4th floor. It wasn't just about singing anymore, it was about connection. She felt like she was planting tiny seeds of hope in the silence, even if she didn't know whether they would ever grow. One night, as she sat beside the comatose man, she noticed something unusual. His fingers, those still lifeless hands that always lay flat against the blanket, twitched slightly. At first she thought it was her imagination or maybe a muscle spasm. But then it happened again. This time his index finger moved ever so gently, almost as if he were trying to reach out. Her breath caught in her throat. Was it possible? Could he hear her? She leaned closer, her voice trembling with emotion. "Did you feel that?" she whispered, half to herself and half to him. "I'm here. I've been here every night talking to you, singing to you. Can you hear me?" There was no response, no sudden awakening. Just the faint beep of the heart monitor keeping steady rhythm in the background. Still, her heart raced with excitement. For months she had poured her energy into caring for this man, believing deep down that kindness mattered, even when there was no visible outcome. Now this tiny movement gave her a spark of hope, a reminder that maybe, just maybe, her efforts weren't wasted. That night, she sang louder and clearer than usual, choosing one of her favorite songs, a gentle folk tune about finding light in the darkest places. As the last note faded into the quiet room, she rested her hand lightly on his arm. "Keep fighting," she murmured. "You're not alone." Unbeknownst to her, someone else had started paying attention to these nightly rituals. A sharp-eyed lawyer named Eleanor, who had been overseeing James Whitaker's affairs for years, began noticing subtle changes in his medical reports. His vitals were improving, and though the doctors couldn't explain it, Eleanor suspected there was more to the story than met the eye. Curious, she hired a private investigator to dig deeper. The investigator spent days observing the hospital staff, blending into the background as nurses and doctors went about their routines. He quickly zeroed in on the young nurse who visited the billionaire's room every night. Through discreet interviews and careful observation, he pieced together her story, her financial struggles, her dedication to her patients, and most importantly, her nightly singing sessions with the unconscious man. When Eleanor received the detailed report, she was intrigued. The investigator described how the nurse spoke to the patient as though he were fully awake, sharing pieces of her life and singing heartfelt melodies. He noted the improvement in James's condition and speculated that her presence might be having an impact far beyond what anyone had anticipated. Eleanor decided to meet the nurse herself. One afternoon, while the nurse was taking a quick break in the staff lounge, Eleanor approached her under the pretense of conducting routine administrative checks. Dressed in a crisp suit and carrying a clipboard, she introduced herself as part of the hospital's legal team reviewing patient care protocols. "Can you tell me about your interactions with Mr. Whitaker?" Eleanor asked casually, jotting notes onto her clipboard. The nurse hesitated for a moment, unsure why this stranger was asking such specific questions. But then she shrugged, figuring there was no harm in being honest. "Well, I try to make sure he's comfortable," she said simply. "I talk to him sometimes, sing to him at night. I don't know if it helps, but I think everyone deserves kindness, even if they can't respond." Eleanor listened intently, her pen pausing mid-sentence. There was something genuine in the nurse's tone, a sincerity that couldn't be faked. When the conversation ended, Eleanor walked away feeling deeply moved. She had expected professionalism, perhaps even indifference, but instead, she encountered pure compassion, a quality that seemed rare in today's fast-paced world. Back in the hospital, the nurse remained oblivious to Eleanor's interest. Life kept throwing challenges her way, and she continued to struggle financially. Eviction notices piled up on her kitchen counter, and the stress weighed heavily on her shoulders. Some nights, after leaving the hospital, she would sit in her car staring at the steering wheel, wondering how much longer she could keep going. Yet, despite everything, she never skipped her nightly visits to the fourth-floor room. One particularly rough evening, she arrived at the hospital feeling drained. Earlier that day, she'd received yet another letter from her landlord, threatening to kick her out unless she paid the overdue rent within a week. On top of that, her younger sibling had called, upset about school problems. By the time her shift ended, she felt like crumbling under the weight of it all. But as she entered the familiar room and saw the comatose man lying peacefully in his bed, her resolve returned. Sitting down beside him, she let out a shaky sigh. "You know, sometimes I wonder why I do this," she admitted softly. "Why I come here every night, even when I'm exhausted and broke and everything feels impossible. But then I look at you and I remember. You need someone too. And maybe, just maybe, my songs mean something to you." Tears welled up in her eyes as she confessed her fears. "I don't know what I'm going to do," she whispered. "I might lose my apartment. I might have to take extra shifts even though I'm already so tired, but I can't stop coming here. Not yet." Her voice cracked, and for a moment, she buried her face in her hands, allowing herself to cry silently. Then, gathering her strength, she wiped her tears and began to sing. It was Amazing Grace, a song she often turned to when she needed comfort. Her voice wavered at first but grew steadier as she continued, filling the room with its timeless melody. And then, something extraordinary happened. As she reached the final verse, she felt a faint pressure on her hand, the hand that was resting on the edge of the bed. Startled, she looked down and saw his fingers moving again, this time with more purpose. They weren't just twitching, they were reaching for hers. Her heart leapt. "Oh my God," she breathed, gripping his hand tightly. Are you waking up?" For a brief moment, she thought she saw his eyelids flutter. But before she could react further, the movement stopped, and the room fell silent once more. Shaken but hopeful, she pressed the call button for the nurse's station and waited anxiously for the medical team to arrive. What neither the nurse nor Eleanor realized was that inside the comatose man's mind, a battle was raging. Fragments of sound filtered through the haze, her voice soft and steady weaving its way into his consciousness. Memories stirred, blurry at first but growing clearer with each passing day. He remembered his childhood, the smell of fresh bread baking in the kitchen and the sound of his mother's voice singing him to sleep during feverish nights. These echoes brought him closer to the surface, pulling him back toward the world he had left behind. For now he remained trapped in limbo, unable to open his eyes or speak. But the bond forming between him and the nurse was stronger than either of them realized. Little did she know, her nightly songs were doing more than offering comfort. They were helping awaken a man whose life had long been shrouded in solitude. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity at St. Mary's Hospital. Word spread quickly among the staff about what had happened in the fourth-floor room. The nurse's discovery that the comatose man's fingers had moved, seemingly, reaching for her hand, had sent ripples through the medical team. Doctors rushed to examine him, running tests and monitoring his brain activity more closely than ever before. Nurses whispered excitedly in the hallways, speculating about whether this could be the beginning of his recovery. For the young nurse, however, the excitement was mixed with anxiety. She couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental was happening, but she also worried it might all be a fluke. What if his movement had been nothing more than a random reflex? What if she had imagined the connection between them? These doubts gnawed at her as she went about her shifts, trying to focus on her other patients while stealing glances toward his room whenever she could. Despite her fears, there were undeniable signs of progress. His vitals continued to improve, and over the next few days he began showing small but consistent responses. One morning, when a doctor shone a light into his eyes, his pupils reacted slightly. A tiny flicker, but enough to make everyone take notice. Another time, during a routine check, his foot moved when the nurse adjusted the blanket covering him. Each new development felt like a miracle, proof that he was fighting his way back to consciousness. But for the nurse, the most meaningful moments happened during her nightly visits. Even though his eyes remained closed, she swore she could sense a change in him. It was as if he was listening more intently now, responding not with words or movements, but with an energy that filled the room. She sang to him every night, choosing songs that carried messages of hope and resilience. Sometimes she would pause mid-song, leaning closer to ask, "Are you still with me? Can you hear me?" And though he never answered, she couldn't help but feel that he was somehow present, holding on to her voice like a lifeline. Meanwhile, Eleanor, the sharp-eyed lawyer who had taken such an interest in the nurse, was piecing together a plan. After her initial meeting with the young woman, Eleanor had become convinced that there was something extraordinary about her. The investigator's report had painted a picture of someone selfless and compassionate, someone who gave without expecting anything in return. But Eleanor knew there was more to the story than just kindness. She believed the nurse's actions were directly tied to James Whitaker's gradual improvement. Eleanor decided it was time to act. She arranged another meeting with the nurse, this time under the guise of discussing hospital policies regarding long-term patient care. When they sat down together in a quiet corner of the cafeteria, Eleanor wasted no time getting to the heart of the matter. "You've formed quite a bond with Mr. Whitaker," Eleanor said, her tone casual but probing. "I've heard from several staff members how dedicated you are to his well-being." The nurse shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "I just do what I can," she replied, brushing off the compliment. "He's my patient and I care about him like I care about everyone else." Eleanor nodded thoughtfully, jotting notes on her clipboard. "It's admirable, really. Not many people would go out of their way to sing to a comatose patient every night. Do you think it's helping him?" The question caught the nurse off guard. She hesitated, unsure how to answer. "I don't know," she admitted finally. "I like to think it does. Music has a way of reaching people, even when they can't respond. At the very least, it makes me feel like I'm doing something meaningful." Eleanor smiled faintly, impressed by the honesty in her response. "Meaningful indeed," she murmured, almost to herself. Then, changing the subject slightly, she asked, "How are you holding up? I imagine working in a place like this isn't easy, especially with everything else you're dealing with." The nurse blinked in surprise. No one outside her closest circle knew about her financial struggles, yet somehow Eleanor seemed to have guessed. "It's tough," she admitted after a moment. "But I manage. I have to." Eleanor didn't press further. Instead, she thanked the nurse for her time and left, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. As she walked away, the nurse couldn't shake the feeling that Eleanor knew more than she was letting on. There was something unsettling about the way the lawyer had looked at her, as if she were studying her, analyzing every word she spoke. Back in her own world, the nurse tried to push thoughts of Eleanor aside and focus on the challenges ahead. Her landlord's threats loomed large, and she knew she couldn't ignore them forever. Rent was due in less than a week, and she didn't have nearly enough saved up to cover it. Desperation crept in, whispering cruel possibilities. Maybe she'd have to pick up extra shifts, even if it meant sacrificing sleep. Maybe she'd have to give up some of the things she loved, like her nightly visits to the 4th floor. The idea of skipping those visits broke her heart. They weren't just a duty, they were a source of comfort, a reminder that she was making a difference, however small. On nights when the weight of her problems felt unbearable, singing to the comatose man gave her a sense of purpose. He needed her, and in a strange way, she needed him too. One evening, as she prepared to leave the hospital, she received a text message from her younger sibling. "Hey, can we talk? Things aren't going well at school." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She wanted to be there for her sibling, to offer guidance and support. But how could she when she was barely keeping herself afloat? Feeling overwhelmed, she retreated to the familiar sanctuary of the 4th floor room. Sitting beside the comatose man, she let her guard down completely. I don't know what to do anymore, she confessed, her voice thick with emotion. Everything feels like it's falling apart. My job, my home, my family, it's all slipping through my fingers and I don't know how to fix it. She paused, taking a shaky breath. Sometimes I wonder why I keep coming here. You probably don't even hear me, do you? But then I think, maybe you do. Maybe my voice is helping you wake up little by little. If that's true, then I can't stop. Not now. Not when you're so close. As she spoke, tears streamed down her face, unchecked and unashamed. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to cry fully, releasing the weight of her burdens in the safety of that quiet room. When she finally ran out of tears, she wiped her face and took a deep breath. Then softly, she began to sing. It was a simple song, one she had learned as a child. The lyrics spoke of finding strength in the darkest moments, of holding on even when everything seemed hopeless. As her voice filled the room, she felt a strange calm wash over her. Whatever happened next, she told herself, she would face it, head on. She had no choice. What neither the nurse nor Eleanor realized was that inside the comatose man's mind, a transformation was underway. Fragments of sound, her voice, steady and soothing, pierced through the fog that had enveloped him for months. Memories surfaced, blurry at first but growing clearer with each passing day. He remembered laughter, sunlight streaming through windows, and the warmth of human connection. These echoes pulled him closer to consciousness, urging him to fight his way back. For now he remained trapped in limbo, unable to open his eyes or speak. But the bond forming between him and the nurse was stronger than either of them realized. Little did she know, her nightly songs were doing more than offering comfort. They were awakening a man whose life had long been shrouded in solitude. The turning point came on a night that felt no different from any other. The hospital hummed with its usual quiet rhythm, the kind of calm that settled in after visiting hours ended, and the corridors emptied. The young nurse finished her rounds, checked on her patients one last time, and made her way to the fourth-floor room. By now, this nightly ritual had become second nature to her, a sacred moment she looked forward to, even when life outside the hospital walls felt like it was crumbling around her. As she entered the room, she noticed something unusual right away. The comatose man's breathing seemed more steady, almost deliberate, as if he were listening intently. She smiled faintly, telling herself not to read too much into it. "Hey there," she said softly, settling into the chair beside his bed. "It's me again. I hope you're ready for tonight's song." She began singing, her voice soft but clear, filling the room with a melody about finding light in the darkest places. As she sang, she reached out instinctively, placing her hand lightly over his, and then without warning his fingers curled around hers. Her breath caught in her throat. For a moment she froze, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure the entire hospital could hear it. His grip was weak, barely noticeable, but it was real. It wasn't a twitch or a random movement. It was intentional. Tears welled up in her eyes as she squeezed his hand gently. "You're still with us, aren't you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "I knew you could hear me." Before she could process what was happening, his eyelids fluttered. Slowly, painfully slowly, they opened. At first his gaze was unfocused, darting around the room as if trying to make sense of where he was. Then his eyes landed on her face, and for a brief moment, their gazes locked. It was fleeting, just a few seconds, but it was enough to send chills down her spine. Without wasting another second, she pressed the call button for the nurses' station and waited anxiously as the medical team rushed in. Doctors and nurses surrounded the bed, checking his vitals, shining lights into his eyes and asking him questions he couldn't yet answer. The nurse stepped back, watching silently as chaos erupted around her. Her mind raced with questions. Was he truly awake? Would he recover fully? Had her songs really made a difference? For the next several hours, the hospital buzzed with activity. News of the comatose man's awakening spread like wildfire among the staff. Some called it a miracle. Others credited modern medicine. But deep down, the nurse knew there was more to it than luck or science. She had poured her heart into caring for him, believing in his potential to wake up even when everyone else had accepted his condition as permanent. Now, seeing him lying there, blinking groggily at the world, she felt a surge of emotions, relief, joy, and an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Over the following days, the man's progress was slow but steady. He regained consciousness in short bursts, though his speech was slurred and his movements clumsy. Physical therapy became a daily routine, with the nurse helping him take small steps toward recovery. At first, he struggled to lift his arms or turn his head, but with each passing day he grew stronger. The medical team marveled at his resilience, attributing it partly to his determination and partly to the care he'd received during his months in a coma. What surprised everyone most, however, was how quickly he formed a bond with the nurse. While other staff members treated him professionally, she approached him with warmth and familiarity. She spoke to him as if they were old friends, sharing stories about her day, cracking jokes to lighten the mood, and encouraging him whenever he felt discouraged. In return, he listened intently, his eyes following her every move as if memorizing her presence. One afternoon, during a particularly grueling physical therapy session, he finally managed to string together a few coherent words. "The singer," he rasped, his voice hoarse and barely audible. The therapist glanced at him confused, but the nurse understood immediately. She smiled, squeezing his hand. "That's me," she said gently. "I've been here with you every night singing to you. Do you remember?" He didn't respond verbally, but the look in his eyes said it all. There was recognition there along with something deeper, gratitude. From that moment on, their connection deepened. He began opening up to her, sharing fragments of his past in halting sentences. She learned that he had lived a solitary life, avoiding people and relationships because of the pressures of wealth and fame. Money had bought him power but also loneliness, and he regretted letting years slip by without meaningful connections. The nurse listened without judgment, offering empathy rather than pity. To her, he wasn't a billionaire tycoon. He was simply a man who needed someone to care for him, both physically and emotionally. And in turn, he found solace in her presence, trusting her in a way he hadn't trusted anyone in decades. Meanwhile, Eleanor, the lawyer who had been observing everything from the sidelines, was putting the final pieces of her plan into motion. After witnessing the nurse's dedication firsthand and hearing reports of the man's remarkable recovery, she decided it was time to act. She arranged a private meeting with him, waiting until he was strong enough to handle serious conversations. When the day came, Eleanor entered his hospital room carrying a stack of documents. "Good afternoon," she said warmly, pulling up a chair beside his bed. "How are you feeling today?" "Better," he replied, his voice still weak but clearer than before. "Thank you for coming." Eleanor nodded, setting the papers aside for a moment. "I wanted to talk to you about something important," she began. "Do you remember the nurse who has been taking care of you? The one who sings to you every night?" He smiled faintly, his expression softening. "Yes, she saved me." Eleanor leaned forward, her tone serious but kind. "She doesn't know who you are, or rather what you are. She treats you like any other patient, with kindness and respect. That's rare, especially given your circumstances." He frowned slightly, confused. "My circumstances? You're worth billions," Eleanor explained bluntly. "To most people, that would change everything. But to her, it doesn't matter. She sees you as a human being, not a bank account." His eyes widened in surprise. Clearly, he hadn't expected this revelation. "Does anyone else know?" he asked quietly. "Not yet," Eleanor replied. "But they will soon. Reporters are already sniffing around, eager to write stories about your recovery. When the news breaks, your life will change overnight, which brings me to my next point. What do you want to do about her?" He thought for a long moment, staring at the ceiling as if searching for answers. Finally, he turned back to Eleanor. "I owe her everything," he said firmly. "Find a way to repay her." Eleanor smiled, satisfied with his response. Consider it done. Unbeknownst to the nurse, her life was about to change in ways she couldn't imagine. Back at home, eviction notices continued to pile up on her kitchen counter, and stress gnawed at her constantly. Yet despite her mounting problems, she remained steadfast in her commitment to her patients and to the man on the fourth floor. Every night she visited him, singing songs and sharing bits of her life, unaware that her kindness was about to be rewarded in the most unexpected way. As the days passed, the man grew stronger, regaining his ability to speak and move with greater ease. During their conversations, he often asked about her struggles, listening intently as she described her financial woes and the challenges of balancing work and family. Each time he nodded thoughtfully, storing away every detail for later. One evening, as she prepared to leave the hospital, he stopped her with a weak but determined gesture. "Wait," he said, his voice firmer now. "There's something I need to tell you." Curious, she turned back, meeting his gaze. "What is it?" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "You've done so much for me," he began. "More than you'll ever know. I want to help you the way you've helped me." Her brow furrowed in confusion. "Help me? How?" Before he could answer, Eleanor appeared in the doorway, holding a folder in her hands. "Let me explain," she said, stepping into the room. "Mr. Whitaker has set up a trust fund in your name. Your debts will be cleared, and you'll have financial security moving forward." The nurse stared at them, stunned. For a moment she couldn't speak, her mind struggling to process what she'd just heard. I don't understand," she stammered finally. "Why would you do this?" He smiled faintly, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Because you reminded me what it means to be human. You gave me hope when I had none. This is my way of saying thank you." Tears streamed down her face as the weight of his words sank in. She had never expected anything in return for her kindness, but now standing there she realized that sometimes the smallest acts of compassion can ripple outward, changing lives in ways we may never anticipate. The news of the trust fund hit her like a tidal wave. At first she couldn't believe it. Her mind raced with questions. How could this be real? Why would someone do something so generous for her? She had spent months caring for him, singing to him, and talking to him as if he were just another patient. She hadn't done it for money or recognition. She had done it because she believed in kindness, even when it felt like no one was watching. Yet here she was, standing in the hospital room, tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by the enormity of what he was offering. "I didn't do this for anything in return," she managed to say, her voice trembling. "I did it because you needed someone." He smiled faintly, his eyes soft but resolute. "And now I'm doing this because you need someone too." His words struck a chord deep within her. For so long, she had carried the weight of her struggles alone, convinced that asking for help was a sign of weakness. But here was a man who understood pain and loneliness better than anyone she'd ever met. And instead of turning away, he was reaching out to lift her up. It wasn't about charity. It was about connection. He saw her not as a struggling nurse, but as a human being deserving of dignity and support. Over the next few weeks, life began to change for her in ways she never imagined. The eviction notices disappeared from her kitchen counter, replaced by letters confirming that her debts had been paid off. Her landlord called to apologize, explaining that an anonymous donor had settled her overdue rent. When she walked into work each day, she felt lighter, freer, as though a heavy chain had been lifted from her shoulders. For the first time in years, she could breathe. But the changes weren't just financial. The bond she shared with the man grew stronger as he continued his recovery. They spent hours talking, sharing stories about their lives, the challenges they'd faced, the lessons they'd learned, and the moments that had shaped them. She told him about growing up in a small town, about the sacrifices her mother had made to give her opportunities, and about the dreams she still held on to despite everything. In turn, he opened up about his own past, revealing the isolation that came with his wealth and the regrets he carried for pushing people away. Through these conversations, she realized how much they had in common. Both had known loss, hardship, and the feeling of being invisible in a world that often overlooked them. Yet both had found hope in unexpected places. In her case, through music and compassion, and in his, through the kindness of a stranger who refused to give up on him. Their friendship became a source of strength for both of them, helping them heal in ways neither had anticipated. As his health improved, he decided it was time to leave the hospital and return to the life he had once tried to escape. His penthouse, apartment, perched high above the city skyline, was a far cry from the sterile halls of St. Mary's. For years it had been a fortress of solitude, a place where he hid from the world and its demands. But now, stepping inside, he felt different. The emptiness that had once consumed him was gone, replaced by a newfound sense of purpose. He wasted no time putting his wealth to good use. Inspired by the nurse's dedication to her patients, he founded a foundation aimed at supporting healthcare, workers who went above and beyond for their communities. Scholarships were established for aspiring nurses, grants were given to hospitals in underserved areas, and programs were created to promote arts therapy in medical settings. The foundation bore the name of the nurse's late mother, a tribute to the woman whose memory had inspired so much of her daughter's resilience. When the nurse heard about the foundation, she was speechless. "You didn't have to do all this," she said during one of their regular phone calls. "This is incredible." "I wanted to honor your family," he replied simply. "Your mother raised someone extraordinary, and I wanted to make sure others like you have the resources they need to keep making a difference." Her gratitude was overwhelming, but it wasn't just about the money or the recognition. What touched her most was the thoughtfulness behind it, the way he had listened to her stories and turned them into action. It was proof that true generosity wasn't about writing checks. It was about understanding people, seeing their struggles and finding ways to ease their burdens. Their relationship extended beyond phone calls and occasional visits. As he regained his strength, he began venturing out into the world again, encouraged by her gentle nudges to reconnect with the people and passions he had abandoned. One of his first outings was to her younger sibling's high school graduation. Dressed in a sharp suit, he arrived unexpectedly, surprising everyone, including her, with his presence. When asked why he had come, he simply smiled and said, "Family is important. You've taught me that." The gesture meant more to her than words could express. Growing up, she had always dreamed of having someone stable in her life, someone who would show up without hesitation. Now, here was a man who had once lived in solitude, choosing to step into her world and become part of her journey. It was a gift she would never forget. Back at the hospital, her colleagues noticed a shift in her demeanor. She seemed happier, more confident, as though a weight had been lifted not just from her finances but from her spirit. Her dedication to her patients remained unwavering, but now she carried herself with a quiet assurance that inspired those around her. Some asked if she had won the lottery, others joked that she must have found a secret stash of happiness. But she knew the truth. Her joy came from knowing that kindness, no matter how small, could create ripples that touched countless lives. She also started mentoring new nurses, sharing the lessons she had learned during her toughest days. "Never underestimate the power of showing up," she would tell them. "Sometimes all someone needs is to know they're not alone." Her words resonated deeply, reminding everyone that compassion was the heart of their profession. Meanwhile, the man embraced a simpler lifestyle, using his resources to bring joy to others. He attended art exhibits, funded community projects, and even volunteered at local shelters. Each act of giving brought him closer to the humanity he had once distanced himself from, and through it all, he stayed in touch with the nurse, cherishing the friendship that had saved him in more ways than one. One evening, as they sat together on the balcony of his penthouse, overlooking the glittering city below, he turned to her with a smile. "Do you remember that song you used to sing to me?" he asked. "Which one?" she teased, laughing softly. "I sang so many." "The one about grace," he said, his voice tinged with nostalgia. "It gave me hope when I had none." She nodded, her eyes shining with emotion. "I'll never forget it either." In that moment, surrounded by the hum of the city and the warmth of their connection, they both realized how far they had come. Two strangers, brought together by fate, had changed each other's lives in ways neither could have predicted. It was a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can lead to the greatest transformations. And as the night sky stretched endlessly above them, they knew their story was just beginning. Years passed, and the bond between the nurse and the man only grew stronger. Their lives took different paths, but the foundation of their friendship remained unshakable. The nurse continued working at St. Mary's Hospital, rising through the ranks to become head of nursing. Her leadership style was shaped by everything she had learned during her toughest days: compassion, resilience, and the belief that every patient deserved not just medical care, but human connection. She became a mentor to countless young nurses, instilling in them the values she held dear. Her younger sibling, inspired by her dedication, pursued a career in education, determined to make a difference in their community. Together, they rebuilt the life that once felt so fragile, finding strength in each other and the support system they had created around them. The weight of financial struggles no longer loomed over them, thanks to the trust fund set up by the man who had changed their lives. But more than anything, it was the emotional transformation that mattered most. The knowledge that someone had seen their worth and chosen to invest in it. On the other side of the city, the man embraced a new chapter of his life. He sold off parts of his business empire, choosing instead to focus on philanthropy and personal growth. Gone were the days of hiding behind wealth and solitude. He now sought out meaningful relationships and experiences. He reconnected with estranged family members, hosting dinners where laughter echoed through rooms that had once been silent. He also formed friendships with people from all walks of life: artists, teachers, social workers. People who reminded him of the humanity he had once distanced himself from. Despite his busy schedule, he always made time for the nurse. They met regularly, sometimes at the hospital, other times at his penthouse or a quiet cafe downtown. These meetings weren't just about catching up. They were moments of reflection, gratitude, and shared joy. They talked about everything: their dreams, their fears, the lessons they had learned along the way. To anyone watching, it might have seemed like an unlikely friendship, given their vastly different backgrounds. But to them, none of that mattered. What united them was something far deeper: a mutual understanding of pain, hope, and the power of kindness. One year, on the anniversary of his awakening, the nurse decided to do something special. She brought her guitar to his penthouse just as she had done countless nights in the hospital room. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, she sat beside him and began to play. It was Amazing Grace, the same song she had sung to him during those long, uncertain months. Her voice carried the same warmth and sincerity, filling the spacious apartment with its timeless melody. When she finished, tears glistened in his eyes. "That song saved me," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "It gave me something to hold on to when I thought I was lost." She smiled, brushing away her own tears. "And you saved me too," she replied. "You reminded me that even in our darkest moments, there's always light waiting to break through." They sat in silence for a while, letting the words hang in the air. Neither needed to say more. They both understood the depth of what they had shared. Their journey hadn't been easy, but it had taught them invaluable lessons about resilience, empathy, and the transformative power of human connection. The foundation they had built together flourished, becoming a beacon of hope for healthcare workers across the country. Scholarships funded the education of hundreds of aspiring nurses, many of whom went on to serve communities in need. Arts therapy programs brought comfort to patients struggling with physical and emotional pain, proving that creativity could heal wounds medicine alone couldn't touch, and grants provided resources to hospitals in underserved areas, ensuring that everyone, regardless of their circumstances, had access to quality care. Every year, the foundation hosted a gala to celebrate its achievements and honor those who had made a difference. The nurse and the man attended together, standing side by side as they addressed the crowd. "This isn't about us," the nurse would always say, deflecting praise. It's about the people who show up every day, giving their best to help others. We're just here to support them. Her humility never failed to inspire those around her. To the man, it was yet another reminder of why he had chosen to repay her kindness. She didn't seek recognition or glory. She simply wanted to make the world a better place, one act of compassion at a time. As the years went by, their story spread beyond the walls of the hospital and the confines of the city. Journalists wrote articles about the nurse who had sung to a comatose billionaire, highlighting the unlikely friendship that had blossomed between them. Talk shows invited them to share their journey, but they declined most offers, preferring to let their actions speak for themselves. They didn't need fame or validation. They already had something far more precious, a bond forged in the crucible of adversity and strengthened by mutual respect. Even as they aged, their commitment to helping others never wavered. The nurse retired after decades of service, passing the torch to a new generation of caregivers. The man, now in his late 80s, slowed down but remained active in his philanthropic efforts. On sunny afternoons, they could often be found sitting together on the balcony of his penthouse, reminiscing about the past and marveling at how far they had come. "We've been lucky," the man said one day, sipping tea as the breeze rustled, the pages of a book lying open on the table. "Not everyone gets a second chance. Or a second family," the nurse added, smiling warmly. "I'm grateful for everything we've built together." He nodded, his gaze softening. "Me too." Their legacy lived on long after they were gone. The foundation continued to thrive, expanding its reach to countries around the world. Nurses trained under its scholarships carried forward the values of compassion and dedication, touching countless lives in ways large and small. And the story of the nurse and the billionaire, a tale of kindness, resilience, and redemption, became a source of inspiration for generations to come. For the nurse, it was proof that even the smallest acts of kindness could ripple outward, creating waves of change. For the man, it was redemption, a reminder that even in silence, love finds a way to speak. Together, they had shown the world that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars and cents, but in the connections we forge and the lives we touch. And though their journey eventually came to an end, their impact endured, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit.